Okay, let's get started. Welcome again, everyone, to today's meeting. My name is Ben Gettleman. I work with Kearns and West. I'm joined by my colleagues Henry DeRuff and Jim Downing, and we'll be managing the meeting today, keeping us on track and helping to facilitate the discussion. I'm going to do some sort of quick orientation, and we'll walk through the objectives. We'll do some introductions and then get into the content. So we have a pretty full agenda today. We want to start by just revisiting the outcomes from our previous meeting, which was held in October. We do want to review and discuss PG&E's draft decommissioning plan, which was released a few weeks ago, and many of you may have already reviewed it, but we do want to walk through that for you all, make sure that that is all clear. We have several presenters who are here today to present on the Eel River. And so I want to thank you all in advance for pulling together all the content. I think it's going to be a really informative discussion. And then we want to talk a little bit. We are at the end of the year here, and we want to talk a little bit about the water forum moving forward, where we're going in 2024. And then similar to all of our meetings, we're going to have some time for public comment towards the end of the meeting. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so let's do some introductions of planning group members, and then I'll go through the agenda, and then we can get into the content. So Nicole, why don't we start with you? We will go around, and then we'll go to the folks who are joining online.
My name is Nicole Whipple. I'm a member of the Round Valley Indian Tribes, and today I'm here as an intern with Save California Salmon.
Hello, I'm Anna Farport. I'm the environmental director for the Sherwood Valley Band of Pomo Indians.
Hello, Mike Shaver with Potter Valley Tribe, Water Resource Manager.
Charlie Schneider with CalTrout.
Megan Quinn, American Rivers.
Don with Russian Riverkeeper.
Shannon Catula, Town of Windsor.
Kathy Monroe, Mendocino County Resource Conservation District. Brenda Tamaris with the Lytton Rancheria.
Vivian Hellowell, PCFFA and IFR, Commercial Fishing.
Pam Jean with Sonoma Water.
David Manning with Sonoma Water.
Dennis McFadden, PVID.
Bree Clotter, Redwood Valley County Water District.
Carol Cinquini, Lake Pillsbury Alliance.
Frank Lynch, same as her.
Terry McCartney, Pinoleville Pomo Nation.
Alan Nelson, Sonoma County Agriculture.
Adrian Garialdi, Russian River Confluence, and Sonoma County Agriculture.
Okay, so for the folks, the planning group members who are joining us via Zoom, if you could just raise your hand in Zoom, and then we'll create a queue, and Jim will just call on you, and we'll kind of do it that way to do it in some order here. So maybe, Jim, you can just call out the names that you're seeing. And again, just ask folks to your name and your organization. That would be great.
All right, I'll just go through the names as I see them here, starting with Matt Clifford.
Hey, good morning. Matt Clifford, Trident Limited.
Audio is working.
Excellent.
Okay, next, Tony Williams.
Good morning, Tony Williams, North Marin Water District.
Glenn Spain.
Glenn Spain, Executive Director, Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations and Institute for Fisheries Resources. Quite a mouthful.
Thank you, Glenn. Next, Hank Seaman.
Good morning, Hank Seaman, County of Humboldt.
Next, Javier Silva.
Hello, Javier Silva. I am representing Ukiah Tribe.
Welcome. Next, Alicia Hammond.
Alicia Heyman, Friends of the Eel River.
Next, Chris Schutz.
Chris Schutz, alternate California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance.
Next, Greg Young.
Hi, Greg Young, Potter Valley Tribe Environmental Director.
Welcome. If there are any other planning group members online, please raise your hands and I'll call on you. All right, I think we're done. Welcome,
Okay.
everyone.
All right, welcome again. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Oop. Up one. So just to look at the agenda, again, we're going from 10 till 1 today. We're going to start with outcomes from the previous meeting, and then we'll go to the PG&E's draft decommissioning plan. There's going to be 2 parts of this. So Jim is going to walk us through the plan itself that is now out for public review. And it's really just kind of going through the key components of the plan to make sure everyone understands what's in there. We'll talk a little bit about how to provide comments and make sure you're all aware of the deadline. And just to make sure everyone's really clear, if you have any comments on that draft plan, you need to submit them in writing to PG&E. So we would love to have an informed discussion today, but those comments won't necessarily be considered by PG&E. So I want to make sure everyone's clear on that. After Jim walks through the draft plan, we do have some proponents who are here who are going to talk through the revised new facility proposal and what revisions have been made and what is now in that draft plan. So we have Pam and Charlie here who are going to walk us through that. Janet Polly was also planning on being here, but she's sick, so she's not able to make it, but they're gonna walk us through that. So thank you in advance for that. And then for Eel River, we have a number of presenters, as you can see. So a couple of the points we're going to hit on, we're going to start with tribal uses, tribal history, and current activities. We'll talk about, Charlie's going to talk about restoration efforts on the Eel River, and then Vivian's going to talk about kind of a history of the commercial fishery. So we're going to sort of touch it from multiple angles, and I think we'll have a good discussion. And then Pam is going to kind of tee up next steps for the water forum, where we're going in the coming year, and then we'll wrap up with public comment, and we'll do our best to wrap up here on time by 1 o'clock. Okay. So any questions on what we've got for the agenda? Good. All right, let's go to the next slide. So just as a reminder of the purpose of the group, I'm not going to read this, but this should all look familiar. So sort of the initial impetus was to inform the decommissioning of the PVP. I think we've all sort of agreed that it's also helpful to just get educational presentations and information about related issues. And so that's what we're doing, continuing that today with our Eel River presentation, and also diving in a bit on the decommissioning process. Okay. Next slide. Just some participation guidelines. I think everyone's been really good about this, but just as a friendly reminder, a lot of different interests in the room, and just ask you all to be respectful about those different interests. We'll do our best to facilitate the conversation, just ask you all to help us. And so for members of the public, we really appreciate you being here for the sort of the initial portion of the meeting. That we just request that discussion be among the planning group members, and then there will be time during public comment to get your feedback. So if anyone in the room is interested in providing public comment, we do have some comment forms right up there. You can fill them out and hand it into one of the 3 of us, and we'll get you in the queue. And then anyone who's online, you can also just raise your hand and we'll get to you. So we should have time, but it is helpful for us to know sooner than later, so we can make sure we do allocate enough time for everyone to provide their comments. Okay, next slide. Okay. Okay, so again, this is a hybrid meeting, so sometimes it can be a little bit quirky of how we get through it, make sure everyone can hear everyone. So we do want to make sure that everyone in the room speaks directly into the microphone, and we'll tell folks on Zoom if we're not able to hear you, and we can make those corrections. And please do let Jim know if you're having any trouble hearing, and we'll do our best to remedy that. For the folks who are in the room, it is helpful for us to keep a queue. So if you'd like to make a comment in the discussion, just put your name tent up like this, and we'll get a queue going. And then for the planning group members online, please do raise your hand, and we'll create a queue that way as well. Okay, and then as a reminder, the presentation that we're going to go through, the notes that we're taking in the summary that's developed, and we're recording this. So these are all going to be available on the website. So we'll make those available as soon as we can. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right, next slide. Okay, so I'm just going to walk through this pretty quickly. we, just as a reminder, this was 2 months ago. So we did have Grant and Janet were here to give an update on the new facility proposal. I thought there was some really good questions and discussion about that proposal. And the proponents are back today to give an update on where that proposal stands. We, Kearns and West, gave some updates on the working groups and what they've been working on, and the status of those efforts. And then we had a presentation both from Lake County and the Lake Pillsbury Alliance on Lake Pillsbury, its importance to the region. And I thought that was a really good discussion. It was well received. And then we also received public comment. So those are kind of the key things we hit on in the previous meeting. As I mentioned before, there's sort of an educational piece that I think people are appreciating. And we really focused on Lake County in the previous one. Today, we're going to focus on the Eel River. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I think, Jim, I'm going to hand this over to you to talk through the draft decommissioning plan. Okay.
So just to preface this is a very high level overview of what is in the document, this PG&E's Potter Valley Project initial draft surrender application and conceptual decommissioning plan. And then after I give these few quick slides, we'll turn it over to the new Eel Russian facility proponents, who will speak at more length about how their proposal has been incorporated into this plan. Next slide, Henry. So just a quick overview of what is in the document. And this is a document that we sent out a link to this document to the full Russian River Water Forum participant list, and it is available on PG&E's Potter Valley Project decommissioning website. So it begins with an introduction, which just provides some context for the project, a series timeline and milestones, which I'll cover in the next slide. And then there's a request for comments. And I want to emphasize that comments in this meeting will not be captured by PG&E. So if you would like to submit comments, they must be submitted directly to PG&E. And we have the contact info on a subsequent slide here. The next section of the document is a description of the project facilities and operations currently, a brief reason for the proposed license surrender, which we've covered in past meetings here. And then there's the conceptual decommissioning plan. And that includes a scenario that includes complete decommissioning of the project, so that Scott Dam removal, as well as the first Cape Horn Dam removal, so removal of the dam and decommissioning of all the Potter Valley Project facilities as one alternative. There's also information on 2 different options for proceeding with Scott Dam removal, as well as information on a proposed restoration to the land that is currently inundated by Lake Pillsbury and related restoration efforts. The Cape Horn Dam alternatives include the 2 alternatives that have been proposed by the new Eel Russian facility proponents. These have been discussed in past meetings here and briefly referred to as the control section with pump station and the roughened channel with gravity supply options. So just again, to emphasize, the new Eel Russian facility proposal is acknowledged and incorporated in PG&E's document here. Any just clarifying questions before we move on? Okay, next. So this is in the document, there are the following milestones. There's the distribution of the initial draft surrender application, which happened a few weeks ago. Deadline for comments, December 22nd. Again, those must be submitted in writing directly to PG&E. There's a consultation period with resource agencies and tribes over the coming 3 months. The distribution of the final draft surrender application on June 3rd. Consultation with resource agencies and tribes again to follow that. It's also a second comment period on this final draft surrender application, which is due July 18th, and then filing of the final surrender application to FERC on January 25th of 2025. You can just pause for any clarifying questions. And last slide, Henry. So again, just directions on the comment process. Again, just to say it one more time, the comments must be submitted in writing to Tony Gigliotti at the address listed here, and electronic submittal is encouraged. So that is it for this very quick overview. Ben, did you want to add something? Or yeah. So next up we have Pam and Mike, question. Yeah. Yes. Go ahead. Yeah.
Mike Shiver with Potter Valley Tribe. Back on your slide before this, when you gave out the schedule, it indicates on the later in the process, there's a consultation with resource agencies and tribes. From discussions over currently, my understanding is back in 1972, when the previous relicensing was occurred, consultations were only occurred with NOAA and Round Valley Tribe, because many of the other tribes in the area were terminated or not active governments at the time. So I do have great concerns that they're waiting to the last month or two of the process to reach out to multiple tribes for consultation. That might be PG&E's and FERC's required schedule, but I do encourage the proponents of any plan to really do intensive outreach and consultation tribes before that period, where there may be delays or other complications that occur very late in the process. And we like to see this move forward as probably the best we can.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And again, I encourage you to submit that comment to make sure PG&E gets it. I believe that Tom was planning on attending. I'm not sure
Tony.
if he.
Oh,
Tony, I'm sorry.
Tony, yeah.
I believe Tony is planning on attending. I'm not sure if he's on or not.
I will check.
Okay, we can check. I mean, for what it's worth, I think he wanted to listen, but he's not available for discussion. But it looks like he is. Hi, Tony. Hi, Guinness.
Good morning, Guinness McFadden, PVID. I'm concerned that the consultation, there are a couple of consultation periods, are only the resource agencies and the tribes. What about the various entities and industries that actually use the water and who are preparing to pay for that? How are they going to be consulted during these consultation periods? Or are they, according to this plan?
That's a good question.
I don't expect a real answer, but I just thought I'd bring the subject up. It seems that the users are being frozen out of the process. And one of the things maybe this forum might be successful in doing in helping clear things up is to map out just exactly who does use the water and where do they think it comes from. There must be some studies that should be made about that.
Thank you.
Hi, responding to Guinness's, I did request a water budget be developed, and actually Sonoma Water Agency does have a fairly complete and detailed document detailing where the water comes from and who is using it. So if you're interested, I would request it, or else I can email it over to you. I do think there needs to be an updated document reflecting the changes in water availability. But again, a water user, water use is an open discussion also, like, is water user just someone that consumes it, or also is there water use for non-consumptive needs for the fishery? Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. Any other questions or comments from planning group members? Okay, so I now think we're going to hand it over to Pam and Charlie to kind of walk us through the revised new facility proposal. Charlie, you going to start?
Hey everyone, Charlie Schneider with CalTrout. So bear with Pam and I a little bit. As we said, Janet was going to join us here, and she's out sick today, unfortunately. So, sorry. So we'll be covering slides that we weren't necessarily prepared for. Good. Right to the mouth. Okay. So I'm going to start with just a little bit of context setting, frame setting for kind of where we're at with the proposal and how it meshes with PG&E's decommissioning plan. And you can go to the next slide. Oh, this is the wrong. Well, I'll just start talking because I can see it, but you can't. So we're going to start with, like I mentioned, a little context, and then we'll discuss the original proposal briefly. And then Pam's going to kind of talk everyone through the revised proposal. You can go 2 slides ahead. There we go. So you guys just saw the schedule. Really, what I want to note here, maybe first is just there's sort of 2 different processes happening in parallel here. This is PG&E's timeline and process that they've set for project decommissioning. You all know by now PG&E's decided to surrender its license for the project, and they've set these deadlines for themselves that has since been approved by FERC. And so this is the box we all work in now, which is PG&E's decommissioning plan box. The first deadline they set was that November 17th deadline, which we've now passed. You're all aware of that. And prior to that deadline, PG&E announced that any party that was interested in owning or operating a portion of the facilities should submit a proposal to them. I think you all know now that happened as well. So hopefully this is just review. You can go next slide. So in response to PG&E's announcement, 3 original proponents submitted a proposal to PG&E and requested they consider that proposal for inclusion in their initial draft decommissioning plan. PG&E in October, is that right? Tentatively agreed to include that proposal in that initial plan, a non-binding inclusion. And that is what was presented at last meeting that, everyone was walked through. Immediately after that, the original 3 partners started work, towards seeing that proposal through. And that really started with some outreach to interested parties, including a number of the parties that are now involved in the revised proposal. And so you can go to the next slide. So this is what I just talked to you on October 9th. PG&E made that non-binding acceptance of the initial proposal. And so to that end, again, the original 3 proponents reached out to a number of stakeholders to seek their input on that initial proposal and try to move this process forward. So with that, I'll hand it to Pam to start talking about the updated proposal.
Sure. Henry, if you could go back to that slide, I want to just mention one thing because it occurred yesterday, is that one of the first tasks that was associated with the original proposal, sorry, I'm going to flip back and forth between initial and original because I thought I changed it on the slides, but I clearly did not. The original proposal, one of the first tasks was for formation of a regional entity via a joint powers authority. And that our board of directors, Sonoma Water's board of directors, and the board of supervisors yesterday just approved that. Mendocino County Inland Water and Power Commission's board approved it last week. I think it was last week. So that regional entity has now been formed. So that's sort of a big milestone. I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. So Charlie mentioned more than once the amount of sort of public outreach or stakeholder outreach, and it wasn't super broad, but outreach with those parties who we felt were the most interested and perhaps the most important to touch bases with based on our proposal. We did end up through a process led by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, as well as the Round Valley Indian tribes, revising our proposal and adding 4 additional partners. You can see, sorry, Henry, can you go to the next slide? You can see those listed on the slide as soon as it comes up. And the revised proposal was submitted to PG&E on November 7th. We're really pleased to see that relevant portions of that proposal have been included in PG&E's license surrender application, the draft that's out for review right now. I just want to make sure that people do understand that there are portions of that proposal that are not pertinent to the FERC process, so they will not appear in PG&E's document at any time probably. So next slide. There's a ton of words on this slide. I don't expect anybody to read this. This is language directly out of the proposal itself. The revised proposal establishes principles that will guide the coalition to negotiate terms and conditions related to construction of the new water diversion facility. The facility is to be designed and constructed to ensure reliable water supplies to the Eel River and protect and restore the degraded Eel River fisheries. This section of the revised proposal, this is really kind of the beginning of the proposal document itself, resets the framework for the proposal, and it brings us back to the 2-basin solution, which has been spoken about for several years now. And I'm sure a lot of folks here are very, very familiar with that. This section also includes 4 what we call core components in the proposal that incorporate the concept of co-equal goals. Those co-equal goals are based on that 2-basin solution process that occurred in the past. Next slide. So the essence of all this text is that PG&E would remove the project dams and a regional entity would construct a replacement facility at Cape Horn Dam site in a manner that does not delay PG&E and their removal or deconstruction process. So this is a very important issue for the new members or new proponents to the proposal, is that any sort of construction of a new facility does not delay PG&E's deconstruction. This section also proposes that federal authority will be sought in order for construction of the new facility. Working with PG&E and FERC, we're hoping to have an understanding of how to get through that federal process and what that federal process might look like by March of next year, 2024. Next slide. So the revised proposal also intends for the proponents to negotiate a license surrender agreement, stating the principles I just talked about as detailed terms. We would expect that not just the proponents of the project, but perhaps other stakeholders and interested parties would be part of a surrender settlement agreement. And ideally, it'd be great if PG&E was too, but we don't know if that will happen. So I don't want to imply that they would be. The coalition intends to reach this type of an agreement by November of next year, so that we're in line with the schedule that you've seen a couple times already this morning, which is PG&E's surrender process. Next slide. So this is the last super wordy slide, hopefully, for our team here. Again, too many words for you to read. This is all in the proposal, which is posted on Sonoma Water's website if you'd like to look at it. So this last piece of the proposal is what we refer to as a water diversion agreement. This agreement is really intended to develop agreement amongst the parties and amongst the proponents and other stakeholders about operation of the new eel restaurant facility, including addressing water rights and funding for fisheries restoration on the Eel River. The proposal refers to this agreement, as I said, as a water diversion agreement. And it's also on that same timeline as the settlement agreement, and it's expected to be completed by November of next year. Because some of the activities associated with this particular piece of the proposal are not FERC related, we would not expect this to be part of the FERC process, even though we're building it into the timeframe for the FERC process. So that's a really super brief summary of essentially the content of the proposal, the revised proposal that PG&E has, as Ben stated a little earlier, or maybe Jim did, that PG&E has included in their document that's out for review right now. Those two options for the new Eel Russian facility are definitely included in that document for comment. We're interested to hear what people think about that. So next slide, Henry. So moving forward, the proponents, this new larger group of proponents does intend to continue to implement the proposal. We don't have formal acceptance from PG&E at this point, but they clearly are considering it since they've included it in their draft document. It may need to be revised, but we don't expect to revise it anytime really soon. And we wanted to make sure that folks know that if they have questions about the proposal itself, that they're welcome to contact any of the proponents associated with the proposal. If you're used to working with CalTrout, for example, by all means, give CalTrout a call and ask them questions about it. We're all happy to respond to questions. And with that, I think that's it.
Great. Thanks, Charlie and Pam. We've got some time for questions and discussion. Thank you, Andy. Vivian, let me get you a microphone.
Thanks for that overview, Charlie and Pam. My question is, which groups are part of the JPA? You named 3 groups, the Sonoma Water Board of Supervisors, is that Mindo or Sonoma, and a 3rd group?
So the members of the JPA, in other words, those signatory to the JPA, include the County of Sonoma, Sonoma County Water Agency, and the Mendocino County Inland Water and Power Commission. The Board of Directors consists of a representative from Sonoma Water, a representative from the County of Sonoma, 2 representatives from Mendocino County Inland Water and Power Commission, and 1 representative from the Round Valley Indian Tribes.
Is Round Valley Indian Tribe part of the JPA?
They are not, but they sit on the Board of Directors.
Thank you.
Mike and Terry, did you still? Okay.
Mike Shaver, Powder Valley Tribe. As I mentioned during the description of the decommissioning schedule and how previously they only consulted with Round Valley Indian Tribes, I have great concerns that your proposal indicates preserving and protecting the rights of water rights and fishery rights for the Round Valley Indian Tribes only. It kind of pits that one tribe against all the other tribes in the region. Powder Valley Tribe has trust land around the Eel River where the Eel River Road Bridge crosses. Robinson Rancheria has ancestral lands upstream of us. Sherwood Valley and many other tribes are downstream of us. I would just maybe analogous to a similar situation, the Owens Valley Water Indian Commission. There's other areas where tribes have joined together as a coalition to represent themselves on a board. We had staff attend, what was it, the Inland Power, no, maybe it was the Powder Valley Irrigation District. And they indicated the 5 board members, and they were concerned if we added the Powder Valley Tribe, we would have 6. You want hopefully have an odd number so you can have decisions. So I could see there are constraints on adding too many members to the board, but I think there should be an effort to have the tribal representation be more of a broader representation. Yes, so just in general, just those general statements to be more all-encompassing of tribes in your efforts.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm just curious who will have oversight of the GPA and how that will be communicated with the rest of the participants in this region. As you have heard, there's a lot of strong interest from agriculture tribes and other municipalities, and this is going to impact us all for the next 100 years. So we would like a little more clarity and transparency on this project and how it's been organized.
So I'm not sure what you mean by oversight over the JPA. The JPA is a public body and it will hold Brown Act meetings that the public can participate in. And I certainly think that pending actually sitting that board and talking to them, that they're going to want to be very inclusive and very transparent about decisions that they're making. But we have not sat down with that board yet. And again, it's a public body.
So being as a public body, how are you choosing who is sitting on the board? Who is making that decision?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
I'm asking how you have chosen who is sitting on the board, who is making that decision.
So each of the parties to the JPA decided who would be their representative.
Thank you.
And Ben, we have a hand online. Alicia Heyman.
Okay, let's go to Alicia and then Megan, I see you too. Go
Hi,
ahead, Alicia.
thank you. I was just wondering if there's going to be any changes to the board makeup in the future, and if there's going to be opportunities for more representation from the Eel Basin.
Do you mean on the JPA?
Yes.
And I don't know. I can't answer that question, but I think as somebody stated already, we are very much at the beginning of this process, and I would expect things to change over time. I could see that board changing over time, expanding, but we don't know that right now.
Great, thank you.
And this is Megan Quinn from American Rivers. My question's very similar to Alicia's in that I was wondering how the voting rights of the board will operate, given that there seems to be, I don't know if overrepresentation is the right way to phrase it, but there is an emphasis on water use, and that might raise some concerns for certain of us here about how resources are managed into the future.
Yeah, so let me be clear about what this JPA has been formed for. If you look at the title of the body itself, it's being formed to construct the new Eel Russian facility. It's being formed for the project. And so we don't know. If you read the document, the JPA formation document, you can see how the voting works. I'm not going to try to explain it here as I don't even have it memorized. So I'm not going to be helpful on that. I'm just going to confuse you. So go to the JPA formation document and look at it. There's an agreement, an actual agreement called a joint powers. I'm not going to get the proper terminology right. There's a document that went along with the board actions that form the JPA that you can go look at with regards to that.
And we can send that out. So we'll coordinate with UPM and we'll make sure everyone gets that. Sure. Vivian?
Vivian Hellwell, Commercial Fishing. My question is similar to Mike's concerning the NGOs that will be consulted with and that are mentioned as part of a governance for an Eel River Restoration Fund. I don't see fisheries mentioned at all. And there was significant economic and cultural sport and commercial fishing on the Eel River that has a strong interest in a harvestable surplus beyond what's needed for delisting. So one of the proponents said, well, if you want to be included in that, you have to speak up. So I'm speaking up. We want to be included. Fisheries. Thank you.
Mike Shaver with Powder Valley Tribe again. I guess I want to kind of tease out. It's my understanding working Indian tribes and going to regional meetings, the Klamath River dam removal, there's a board that involves the tribes for the dam removal. So you're describing a regional entity for the diversion, with most of the direction coming from Mendocino and Sonoma, it might be operating the diversion. Do you envision a second board that will be more involved with the actual restoration and activities in the Eel River that the tribes may be involved in for restoration, and more of the Eel River stakeholders?
Yeah, I think the answer at this point is we don't know. You know, we're in very early days here, and this is a much different process than Klamath in some ways. So in Klamath, KRRC, the nonprofit set up to do dam removal, it's just a very different process than we're in here, where PG&E is still the owner and license holder of the dams. The building of a diversion facility in that JPA is just one piece of that. A potential Eel River restoration fund is likely to be outside of the FERC process and maybe not something that PG&E is involved in. So I think that's a great question. And it's something, to speak to your and Vivian's question, something we're thinking a lot about. I think from CalTrout's perspective, we feel like fisheries recovery is an all hands on deck exercise. So we would welcome, as much involvement in that process as possible.
Vivian, did you have another question?
It's more of a comment. Other groups have stepped forward and negotiated with the Sonoma Water Users group on this second proposal. And though they've talked to some of us, we haven't been at the table there. So we don't necessarily support trading a water right for money for restoration in the Eel River, because we want to make sure that enough water stays in the Eel River with climate change and other changes that are coming about to make sure we have a robust recovery of salmon in the Eel River before any transfer to the other basin occurs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy Monroe with the Mendocino RCD. I want to just clarify, get a clarification of what the goals are exactly of the new joint powers agreement. My assumption is that you're going to have a lot to do in the next year or two to be able to keep up with PG&E's decommissioning, but you're going to have to figure out then the financing for this entity, where the financing will come from, how much it will cost. And then based upon that, where the water will be allocated based upon how it's financed. Are those things that you'll be working on this next year?
Yes. And if you look at the proposal, there's some information in the calendar, the schedule that's in there with regards to that. That's a very, very big lift, allocating water and figuring out how to pay for it.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on this topic? Hi, sir. We're going to ask you to save it till public comment, if that's okay. We'll get you a comment form, and we'd love to hear your comment then. Okay. Well, thank you to Pam and Charlie for the presentation. We will send out that JPA document that Pam mentioned. And I think that the idea is to continue to update this group as the JPA and the proposal continue through the process. Okay, so let's go on to the next agenda item. So go back one, please. So the Eel River presentations, we really have kind of three segments here. And so my suggestion would be we have a fair amount of time reserved. I would suggest we kind of do this in three pieces. So the first piece is on tribal use, history, and current activities. So we have Nicole Whipple here from Save California Salmon. We have Mike Shaver from Potter Valley Tribe. Luis Santana, who I believe is online. Oh, hi, Luis. And then Anna Farport is here from Sherwood Valley. So I would suggest let's have the four of you all present. And then we'll have some time for questions. Then we'll go to the next portion. Charlie's going to talk about restoration efforts on the eel. Let's have a little time for questions and discussion. And then finally, Vivian is our final presenter, who's going to talk about fisheries. So hopefully that works. I'm going to hand it over to you now, Nicole, and we will pull up your slides.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Nicole Whipple, and I would like to share some information with you, some basic information on tribal water rights. I've been in the subcommittee and have been asked to speak a little bit about tribal water rights because there's been a lot of questions and confusion on, not only why is Round Valley the only tribe. My name is Nicole Whipple again. I am an intern with Save California Salmon. The information that I will be sharing is on behalf of myself as an intern, a Indigenous Peoples Law Master's student, and an advocate for water and fish, not on behalf of the Round Valley Indian tribes. Next slide, please. So a little bit about Save California Salmon. We are dedicated to policy change and community advocacy for the Northern California salmon and fish dependent people. We support local communities advocating for effective policy change, protecting clean water, restored fisheries, and vibrant communities. Here you can see our board member, Morningstar Galley, myself, our staff attorney, Casil, and our executive director at the Tribal Water Summit in Sacramento this year. Next slide. First in time, first in right. Tribal water rights in California. So California water rights. After 1850, the state adopted riparian rights based on ownership of land bordering a waterway. The property owner has the right to use that water, a right that cannot be transferred apart from the land. Here you'll see Eel River Watershed Basin, Tribal Water Summit. We all drink the same water, and these are ancestral territories of the tribes in the area. Next slide. Tribal water rights. So the question, what are the tribal water rights and how do they apply to the Potter Valley Project? The intention of this presentation is to provide knowledge and resources related to tribal water rights. Tribal water rights with respect to federally recognized tribes represent a trilateral rural government system. With that being said, what I'm trying to explain is that it's with tribes, it's difficult because we know as agencies that there are many cross-jurisdictional boundaries. Well, when you throw tribes into that, that creates three: the state, the local, the agencies, and then the tribal governments. Tribal land management may be subject to Administrative Procedures Acts, meaning judicial decisions are not the single form of adjudication in respect to dealing with Native Americans, making our dependent nation status unique. This is our Save California Salmon hosted a day of action. Thank you to all of our NGOs. Cal Trout's very strong. Power Nature Coalition, we're all involved and supportive of us there, as well as the tribes in this Sacramento Valley. And this is our Lake County representation. We had the Habenapo tribal dancers perform for us and pray on our event. Next slide. Water rights system. So tribal water rights cannot be destroyed by state water law. Water rights are the entitlement authorizing water usage. These are property rights. One thing that I would like to share and point out that, as an Indigenous Peoples Law student is that it's apparent for us to understand that property rights, criminal rights, commerce, Those are all based on dealing again with Native American tribes, which is why we have inherent and senior rights. Tribal water rights equals senior water rights. In winters, the Supreme Court examined tribal water rights to the water associated with the Fort Belknap Reservation. In this winter's doctrine, it held that federally reserved lands have a right to use sufficient water to fulfill the primary purpose of the reservation, claiming again that tribal water rights cannot be destroyed by state water law or by water users acting in accordance with state law. Next slide. Back to the Eel River. The Eel River Basin is the third largest salmon-bearing river in California. The river flows through multiple counties over multiple agency jurisdictions and private lands. It holds tribal significance in place names representing the ancestral territories of both recognized and non-recognized tribes from Humboldt, Trinity, Mendocino, and Lake counties. Federally recognized tribes include the Ronnerville Rancheria Bear River Band, the Wiyot Tribe, the Caddo Tribe of Laytonville, the Round Valley Indian Tribes, Sherwood Valley Band of Poma Indians, and the Potter Valley Tribe. Initially in my presentation, I was going to give a brief discussion about each of these tribes, but we were able to reach out, as Mr. Shaver had asked, to our local tribes to have them present and have them here. Next slide. So my presentation again is about public concerns and comments that I've heard as my in my time as part of a program member, a planning group member. Why is Round Valley Indian Tribes the lead tribe or only proponent? The Potter Valley Project is located in the ancestral territories of the Ukiah and Pomo tribes. The Eel River Basin includes several tribal territories, including the Wailaki. The Round Valley Indian Tribes is the only tribe where the 7 Ukiah tribelets and Wailaki tribes are federally recognized. The 1852 Congressional Act creating the Round Valley Indian Community, known today as the Round Valley Indian Tribes, predates any other water right. First in right, first in time. Round Valley Indian Tribes holds a senior water right as the Eel River is adjacent, surrounding the Round Valley Indian Reservation, holding a riparian right. Next. Another shout out to Cal Trout and Friends of the Eel River for allowing our Ukiah tribal members, Ukiah elders, and Round Valley Indian tribal members and council to participate in Eco Flight. We got these beautiful pictures of our Eel River that we took on our Eco Flight. Round Valley Indian Tribes is one of 5 California reservations established by the U.S. by executive order in 1852. The Nome Colt Farm is an administrative extension of the Nomalaki Reservation, where 6 tribes were forced relocated into the Aboriginal territories of the Ukiah tribes. The 7 confederated tribes have not relinquished our rights to our ancestral lands, our water rights, nor have we relinquished our hunting, fishing, and gathering rights. To share documentation, I've explained it over and over again how many times, many times why we are first in right, first in time. I have listed Donnelly versus US, which states that Congress itself recognized that the Hoopa Valley Reservation as lawfully existing as early as July 27th, 1868. This included removing the Indians from Smith River Reservation to Hoopa Valley and Round Valley reservations. This is next slide, please. Fish and Game Code includes the Covelo Indian Community. Covelo Indian Community means the Confederated Tribes of the Round Valley Indian Reservation located in Mendocino County. The traditional Indian fishing practices means a way of taking fish that is recognized in the customs and traditions of the Covelo Indian Community. Historic 1873 Round Valley Indian Reservation means a reservation described and set aside by Congress for the Covelo Indian community in the Act of March 3rd, 1873. Again, I'm just providing details on first and right, first and time. Next slide. We have more legislative findings. Jurisdiction over the protection and development of natural resources, especially the fish resource, is of great importance to both the state of California and California Indian tribes, which would include our other tribes. 2 California Indian tribes control over their minerals, lands, water, wildlife, and other resources is crucial to their economic self-sufficiency and the preservation of their heritage. Next slide. AB 1936. Serenius Hastings and the state bear significant responsibility for the irreparable harm caused to the Yuki people and the Native American people of the state. Again, this explains state law that has been created last year thanks to Assemblymember Ramos. We had 5 landmark California cases to represent and support California Indian tribes. One of them was AB 1936, changing the name of Hastings Law School, where the legislature found that Serenius Hastings promoted and financed Native American hunt expeditions in the Eden and Round Valley areas, promoting the massacre of Yuki women and children. Hastings enriched himself through the illegal seizure of large parts of these lands. The state bears significant responsibility. The state has formally apologized to the Native American people of the state for genocide financed and perpetrated by the state. This again is law, which includes many initiatives, including the reparation to the Yuki people, their territories there, and Aboriginal territories. Next. The state of California has many executive orders. One acknowledges and apologizes on behalf of the state. Another, every state agency and department subject to executive control is to encourage communication and consultation with California tribes to answer one of the questions as to why the tribes are the lead in these projects. Addressing biodiversity crisis, accelerating nature-based solutions requires inclusive partnerships and collaborations among federal, state, and local governments and California Native American tribes. So again, to answer the questions about why are the tribes so involved, this is your state law. These are your state executive orders. Cal EPA. Cal EPA is where our California Water District is under the Cal EPA department. Designated disadvantaged lands, including but not limited to federal American Indian reservation and lands held in trust by the United States for the benefit of American Indian tribes in California. Next slide. California State Water Board also has recently acknowledged, with the help of our tribal NGOs, including Save California Salmon, to include tribal beneficial uses, which states to protect activities specific to Native American cultures and their uses of California waters. Next slide. Talking a little bit more about environmental and social justice. The environmental, this is where our tribes fit in. We are, again, Cal EPA considers us justice impacted areas. California Public Utilities Commission regulates essential utility service to consumers, safeguards the environment, assuring safe and reliable access to all Californians. Serving all Californians, Environmental justice means the fair treatment of people of all races, cultures, and incomes with respect to the development, adoption, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws and regulations and policies. So again, I'm just showing and sharing our California law. And then we have our US EPA law, which also includes an executive order directing each federal agency to make achieving environmental justice part of this mission by identifying and addressing, as appropriate, disproportionately high and adverse human health or environmental effects of its programs, including tribal populations. Again, thank you, Cal Trout, Friends of the Eel, Eco Flight Pictures, and Eco Flight. So another concern that we hear is Round Valley Indian Tribe says, but they haven't yet adjudicated their water rights. I spoke a little bit about the adjudication process in regards to water rights. Does not refer only to judicial findings. The tribe in the Winters case, I have been informed, has not formally to date adjudicated their water right. Yet this is what upholds our tribal water rights. Next slide. Well, in that picture, you'll see our Ukiah committee from Round Valley with our governor, tribal affairs staff, Christina Snyder and Loretta Miranda, and then Power and Nature Coalition. We had a lobby day where I was able to speak with Senator McGuire on these issues. So moving into more federal laws. As I talked about, we have many cross-jurisdictional boundaries within the Eel River, dealing with tribes, fisheries, and I wanted to share this joint secretarial order from the Department of Interior. This order fulfills a trust responsibility to Indian tribes in the stewardship of federal lands and waters, issued by the Secretary of the Agriculture and the Secretary of the Interior to ensure that the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Commerce, the Department of the Interiors, and their component bureaus and offices are managing federal lands and waters in a manner that seeks to protect the treaty, religious substance, and cultural interests of federally recognized Indian tribes, consistent with the nation-to-nation relationship between the United States and federally recognized Indian tribes. While we did not adjudicate our rights, this is not the first go-round with Round Valley Indian tribes and PG&E or FERC. In Covelo Indian Community versus FERC, it states the underlying premise is that congressional intent will control. We just provided a secretarial order in determining, and that our tribe, first in right, first in time. In determining this intent, we are cautioned to follow the general rule that doubtful expressions are to be resolved in favor of the weak and defenseless people who are the wards of the nation. Indigenous people, tribal nations are dependent nations, dependent upon this protection and in good faith. The mere fact that a reservation has been open to settlement does not necessarily mean that the open area has lost its reservation status. This may include private lands. Next slide. Covelo Indian tribes. Oh, sorry. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. In the same case, this case exerts as an agency of the federal government. FERC is subject to the United States fiduciary responsibility towards Indian tribes. The same trust principles that govern private fiduciaries determine the scope of FERC's obligation to the community. The community known today as the Round Valley Indian Tribes, by virtue of being located on the Round Valley Indian Reservation, has statutory fishing rights in the Eel River. This should sufficiently establish the community's property right for purpose of due process analysis. Can I check time? Am I okay? Okay, next. I won't go through all of these, but I shared the legal process again because there is confusion about adjudication laws. I shared many of those laws. I just wanted to again reiterate that the adjudication process, particularly with tribes and federal agencies, does not always include court findings, but the process, the Administrative Procedures Act processes. There's continued information on the Administrative Procedure Act, which includes formal rulemaking, informal rulemaking, formal adjudication, and informal adjudication. Next. Wrapping up, Public Law 280. You'll hear, I've brought it up a few times, and there's been much confusion about Public Law 280. States that states may not regulate environmental control, land use, gambling, and license on federal Indian reservations. Some of the context that is missing in Public Law 280 is that it was created in 1953. Prior to that, tribes were under the War and then the Interior Department, and that Public Law 280 was actually created to help protect the tribes, not to create a way for the state to control the tribes. Thank you for allowing me the time to share my knowledge. Again, I speak on behalf of my studies and Save California Salmon and not Round Valley Indian Tribes. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Okay, so we're gonna switch and go with Luis next, and Luis's little friend, and then we'll go to Mike, and then Anna, and then we'll pause and for questions and discussion. So you guys need 2 microphones.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Luis Santana. I'm a fisheries biologist for Robinson Rancheria. This is Stoney Timmons. He works for Tribal Eco Restoration Alliance. So at the end of my slides, he'll be able to discuss what his organization does. Oh, sorry. Oh, and this is Lucas. This is my son. One of his grandpas is out of the country, and the other grandpa had to work today, so I had to bring him to work. But I'm just gonna talk about kind of the fisheries perspective of Robinson Rancheria, their tribe. If I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the hitch situation that we have going on. And so this is a Clear Lake hitch. On the left is an adult Clear Lake hitch from Kelsey Creek. On the right is a juvenile hitch from Cooper Creek in Upper Lake. And so these used to be very abundant throughout the Clear Lake area. They're subspecies of Sacramento hitch. And tribes around the area, before there was reservations, it was villages, they would, take as many as they needed for a couple years, and there was still plenty to go around. Next slide, please. And so fish were very important for the native peoples around Clear Lake. And there was 4 runs in the Clear Lake Basin. And the first run that would come in the, early winter was the Sacramento sucker. And so they would harvest Sacramento sucker as efficient as they could. It was a lot more difficult to catch them because the waters were deep at that time. And so they would use willow baskets to catch these suckers. And so the way you would do that is you would get 3 to 5 younger men to put down these traps, and they would stand on top of these traps, and they would be about chest deep, and they would wait for these baskets to get full, and then they would pick up their baskets, and that's how they would get suckers. And then the next run that would come would be the Sacramento pike minnow, and they typically use spears for those. And then after that was a Clear Lake hitch, and you could literally just grab them from the stream. You could walk up to the stream and get whatever you needed for the next couple of years. And then the last one was the Clear Lake splitsail, which is now extinct. And so the Clear Lake hitch is kind of facing the same thing that the split tail went through. They lost a lot of habitat for spawning and rearing, and now it's basically the same cycle all over again. And so typically they would dry and salt these fishes. They would use them for food, but they would also use it for trade. And they would take it to the coast, the Mendocino coast. They would take it up north and just, they lived on a fish economy, and they would trade anytime they needed to trade. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about what some of the tribes in the area are already doing to kind of bring back the fishery. We're doing creek population assessments in individual creeks, pit tagging. So that involves putting these little tiny tags into hitch specifically, but you could do it in other species. And then you just try to recapture those tagged fish. A lot of water quality monitoring going on. That's been going on for a very long time. Habitat assessments, mostly to see if there's any barriers in the streams that will kind of negate either migration of the adults going upstream or migration of the juveniles going downstream. Spawner surveys. So when the hitch are spawning, we're out there trying to see if we could catch any spawners and count them just to, kind of get an overall view of what each creek is producing. Invasive species management. I think I might have taken that slide out. But this involves, a lot of different invasive species. Himalayan blackberry in the creeks that choke the creeks. Carp and goldfish in the lake itself because they eat a ton of eggs and uproot a lot of aquatic vegetation. One thing we're also looking into is mute swans on the lake. They're an invasive waterfowl species. They're very big. They outcompete all the native waterfowl, and they kind of just do the same thing that carp and goldfish do with eating aquatic vegetation and stirring up sediments. And fish rescues. Last year, we did fish rescues when the water was too high because the hitch got out of the creeks and they started going into the floodplains and into ditches. So we did that. And then when the creeks recede, we also do rescues then. So when pools become disconnected and we don't think the water quality is going to allow for the fish to survive, we go in and do fish rescues. Next slide, please. So this is just Robinson specific stuff. We do work with all the tribes in the area, a lot with the Pomo of Upper Lake, Scotts Valley, Big Valley, but anytime anyone wants to get involved, we collaborate quite often. One of the things we do a lot is tule replanting. Tara helps a ton with that. And good fire projects. And so Sony will talk about that in some slides ahead. Next slide, please. So this is just talking about our carp program. I could talk about this all day, so I'm not gonna kind of bore you guys and take up everyone's time. But we found that the amount of carp and goldfish biomass in the lake was double what was ecologically damaging for the lake. So it just adds to the problem of why Clear Lake isn't so clear anymore. Next slide, please. This is just talking about the species we caught during our feasibility study when we were netting them. And carp and goldfish were the highest fish that we caught during that time. Next slide, please. So now I'm just going to talk about a little bit about fishing. I don't really do it justice because I'm not a Robinson tribal member, but I do know that fishing was family bonding time back when they were allowed to do so. Today, they technically cannot fish for hitch because they are state listed and everywhere to catch them is under state jurisdiction. But the social setting was a big part of it. I mean, it wasn't just villages from the area, villages from outside the county today would come and fish and take their fill. And there was still just always enough to go around. But even before fishing, they would have to gather all the materials to allow for a successful fisheries harvest. Next slide, please. And so when we talked to the Chris Center about the Robinson ancestral land, it's kind of the same thing with a lot of tribes in the area. They typically didn't have just one village. They would go all over the place. So a lot of the older generation remember going to the coast and trading for seaweed. They remember going up north and trading for eel and salmon. They remember going to the Central Valley to do the same thing. And when I talk about eel, it's lamprey. Next slide, please. Yeah, so outside of what we do on Clear Lake, what we're also looking forward to working with is elk, lamprey, salmon, and trout, mostly on the Eel River. One of the stories that I always heard, I don't know if you guys heard about I'm sure a lot of you have, the Bloody Island Massacre, when a lot of the natives in the area were massacred because of retaliation from the other side of the lake. So during the time of this massacre, it was mostly women, children, and elders. And the men were off hunting for elk. And they were up Elk Mountain somewhere, so not too far. But when they came back, their village site was just decimated, and there's very few survivors. But another story that I heard was before the Scott Dam was put up, that was actually one of their elk hunting grounds. Sacramento pike minnow. So it's an interesting situation because Sacramento pike minnow belong in the Clear Lake Basin, but not in the Eel River Basin. So, I have contacts at Cal Trout Unlimited, UC Berkeley. So this last summer, we went to the Weir near Garberville, and we got a bunch of their pike minnow to bring back so that Robinson members could eat them. Next slide, please. And so we're starting to work on restoration projects. They're pretty small right now, but we do have sites on some big projects, specifically on Scotts Creek. I just applied for a $4 million restoration project. And so moving forward, hopefully we could do the same thing on the eel. Next slide. Next one after that, and I'll hand it to Stony.
Alrighty, thank you for your time. My name is Stony Timmons, crew lead for the Tribal Eco Restoration Alliance. We are a cross-cultural, multi-organizational collaborative that works to revitalize ecology, economy, and culture through indigenous-led land stewardship. We're a nonprofit based in Lake County in Upper Lake. Next slide, please. So this is a project that we worked on and partnered with Robinson at Old Robinson, where we built a willow wall. As you can see in these pictures, there was heavy erosion going on. So we put willow stakes in the ground and weaved almost like a basket using that material to catch the erosion. On the picture on the right is all the erosion and soil that the wall had caught. And yeah, this is gray willow, which is a basketry material for our people, where we make fish traps out of, or baby baskets. Next slide, please. This is a Clover Creek restoration project that Luis touched on. We did a bunch of removal of invasive plants. The primary invasive plant was the Himalayan blackberry bush. We used hand tools such as hand saws and loppers to clear a path for the hitch to be able to swim through and make it to their spawning sites successfully. Next slide, please. And this is cultural burning that we've been doing around Lake County and a little bit in Mendocino County. The picture on the left is on Robinson's lakefront property. We burned some tule, which is an important material for us. It's a food resource. We use them for housing and is a really good hitch habitat. Luis touched on the Bloody Island Massacre. It's also how one of my ancestors survived that massacre, was breathing through one of these tule reeds. But the purpose of cultural burning, it mimics a slow moving, low intense fire that reduces years and years of fuel load. So you don't you know, we've all been impacted by the catastrophic wildfires here in Mendocino and Lake County. So we want to reduce that fuel load. It's also important for our basketry material. It makes the material stronger and more flexible, like the picture on the right. Those are willow sticks. They get straight like that from burning. Yeah, and then turned into basketry material. Thank you for your time.
Hey, Mike.
First, I want to thank Nicole and Louise and Stoney for their great presentations. I want to kind of just pull the things that Louise had described that tribes are doing in the Clear Lake Basin. I worked with tribes there over the last 2 decades, and those are examples of some of the things we could take over to the Eel watershed. So I really want to connect all those activities that were shown there are very relevant to the work we can do in the Eel watershed. The tribal council has asked me to introduce you to Potter Valley Tribe and give an overview of our environmental program. Many of you already may have know the Potter Valley Tribe. They're very active in community programs. The tribal government itself covers a diverse range of responsibilities. They have housing programs on their residential lots, education programs for their youth, elder programs, currently working on a food sovereignty grant where they're doing some small ag production and looking at trying to process that and build capacity for local food producers. And here it kind of gives our mission statement. Apologize for the small text. This is just a screenshot of our website we have online. Next slide, please. Here we can see the historical areas of the tribe. Do you have a pointer here somewhere? Thank you. There we go. So Potter Valley is here in the center, and the tribe traditionally resided in this area and utilized resources to the south all the way down to Mendocino. Lake Mendocino currently is, and trading with those tribes and trading out to the coast, and then also to north, gathering resources, the salmon, elk from the Eel River watershed, and then trading to the east. So here you can see a generalized ancestral and traditional practices of trading of the tribe. Next slide, please. These are the current land holdings of the tribe. We do have coastal properties that we host an intertribal campout once a summer. We have over a dozen tribes, 200 attendees, youth attending workshops for a week, usually in late June. We have residential and commercial properties in the Mendocino area. With the residential properties, we're helping support low-cost housing for tribal members. And in the economic, we're trying to build capacity for the community and the food processing and sustainable ag. More residential units in the Potter Valley area. And then to the north, we have some trust land right on the Eel River there. And then we've worked with the Mendocino Land Trust and acquired some of the previous lands relinquished by PG&E that I'll give you a little more detail of. Next slide, please. Here's kind of a more close-up shot. There's our property right where the Eel River bridge, the bridge crosses Eel River. You have the Horn Dam here down below, and this is the old mill site. These are the properties the tribe has with working with the Mendocino Land Trust. The tribe had following up on some of the cleanup the state had done from the milling practices, and now is trying to utilize that for some recreation for the tribe and kind of a base for us to do our natural resource improvements. We did some wildfire mitigation projects, did some thinning up on the Trout Creek area, and then brought that material down and did biocharring to try to remove the biomass with less emissions, and quantified that previously, my director, Greg Young, to kind of get a feel for how much energy you had to put in to do the biochar and how much benefit there was to the climate. Next slide. Here is kind of a list of all the different activities that the environmental office has worked with. I won't read through those all, but I've kind of described a lot of those. And then going on to, I want to wrap up with our clean water program we're just developing now as a newly funded and help support my position. And then also the Eel River cleanups. Next slide, yep. And then here you can see just some photos of our most recent cleanup. The tribe has been doing this over a decade, and the Friends of Trout Creek and some of the neighbors have been doing it, I think, almost 30 years. PG&E had really been the host previously, and the tribe took the lead on PG&E stepping away from some of these community activities. The tribe stepped up and is really taking on the responsibility to try to host this cleanup every year. Good attendance by local community members, and tribal staff help support with all our equipment. We get a waiver on dumping that at the local transfer station. Next slide. I want to wrap up here with, as part of our Clean Water Act funding, the tribe is working with US EPA to develop monitoring sites right there where our trust land is on the Eel River, where we have groundwater wells and Eel River sampling sites to kind of show the water quality on our tribal lands and what could be utilized, what those waters are could be utilized for. And then we're looking at stormwater runoff, all these really tight sampling spots. We want to get a feel what kind of stormwater is coming off our lands we're working with on that land conservation area. And as we do wildlife mitigation projects, we do road maintenance, we want to kind of watch that water quality and how it responds to some of those land use activities. We've also have gone up, included in our sampling plan, upstream of the tribe's trust lands on Lake Pillsbury and on the main stem of the Eel way up there near Bloody Rock Trailhead to try to get a feel for water quality above the reservoir. The water that we step out in front of our reservation lands into the Eel River aren't really river waters. They're Lake Pillsbury waters coming by our lands. So we really want to get a feel for, as we look at restoration, what is the kind of water quality that was naturally found above the reservoirs. Then we're also looking, as water gets transferred into the Russian River watershed, how is water quality within the Potter Valley and with the mixed land uses there, residential, agricultural. And then as it moves down towards Lake Mendocino, how the water quality may be affected by the management of Lake Mendocino. We've had concerns about the turbidity that's exiting the Lake Mendocino and impacting the Russian River watershed. So the tribe's looking at going upstream and downstream to really get a whole picture of the water quality in our region, and working with the tribes. We talked with Anna from Sherwood Valley about doing samplings on the same days that we do ours, so we can kind of maybe get a regional look at water quality. And then also talking with Coyote Valley, wherever they are, Coyote Valley over here, and then also Hopland down below. Try to do sampling events where we're sampling on the same day to look at water quality above and below in the different reaches of the river. Thank you again, and I'll pass that off.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Okay, we've got one more presentation from Anna, and then we'll pause for questions and some discussion.
Good morning. I'm the environmental director for the Sherwood Valley Band of Pomo Indians. We have some of our other environmental program crew here. Shayna Williams is an environmental assistant. Ethan Henthorn, our water technician, and Emiliano Perez is our environmental technician. And we're kind of an office of shy introverts, myself included. So I'm the designated speaker for today, but if y'all want to say anything, please come up. If I miss anything, please, you're welcome to come join me and say something. So we put this presentation together jointly as our program. Okay, next slide. So for generations, the Gila River watersheds, rushing creeks have been essential to Native Americans' way of life. The tribal community gets food like salmon and steelhead from the water. The creeks provide water for the native plants and trees, which our Sherwood Valley ancestors shared so they can thrive and be used as food, basketry, hunting, collecting, and cooking implements. In many ways, the plants and trees are traditional medicine. The area is better protected from fire by the water. For Indigenous people, the flow of water is very important. So it's not just the salmon are of course super important and now endangered, but there's also so many different plants and animals that also rely on these waterways. And all of those are traditional food sources as well as basketry, home building, hunting, etc. Next slide. These maps show some of the traditional territories. On this side, there's the Pomo villages that were along Outlet Creek. Outlet Creek is also known as the middle main fork of the Eel River. And then on the other map is a zoom out where you can see some of the other tribal territories that are also on the Eel River. And we're showing these maps because we want to show like how many Pomo villages were recorded as existing here in the Little Lake Valley and also in Sherwood Valley. But also want to acknowledge that these maps are possibly an imperfect representation. They were made in 1908 by a UC Berkeley professor who was recording information about former village sites as it had been nearly 50 years since a lot of these villages, the people in them had been displaced. So it's very much just like a snapshot in time of this one professor's information he was able to gather decades after these villages were no longer inhabited. And the folks who were displaced from some of these villages, of course, ended up going up into Ukiah territory into what's now Round Valley. And some of the families from Round Valley tribes know their lineage as being Little Lake Pomo from the Little Lake Valley. Oh yeah, and then the orange color there is the Kato tribe and other Athabascan languages tribes. All right, next slide. All right, we just mainly wanted to tell you about our program and the work we've been doing on the middle main fork of the Eel River, also known as Outlet Creek watershed. The environmental program has been around since 1996, so for quite some time, doing water quality monitoring, non-point source pollution monitoring and best management practices, environmental education, wildfire prevention, macroinvertebrate monitoring, and then our newest additions that we're still just working on right now is we are building a native plant nursery, and we're going to be collaborating with Trout Unlimited, doing some fish passage barrier assessments in the Little Lake Valley. Next slide. So the water quality monitoring on tribal lands, there's 3 different tribal lands on different parts of the valley. And on those lands, there's 3 different creeks. So they're basically all tributaries of Outlet Creek. All the waters on the tribal lands eventually flow into Outlet Creek and then the Eel River. So we have monitoring on tributary of Bechtel Creek, a tributary of Davis Creek, and a tributary of Sherwood Creek. And the parameters that what we're monitoring are dissolved oxygen, temperature, turbidity, conductivity, and pH. And then also whenever we go out to our sites, there's 15 different sites on the tribe's land. We also have a field log where we're recording observations, such as how much algae is there, there's foam and oily sheen, if there's fish present or absent, and if there are macroinvertebrates present. Macroinvertebrates are basically little critters who live in the water who are often the food sources for fish. And then we also do lab tests at certain sites, particularly looking at phosphorus levels and E. coli. So this has been a very successful program. And we had the idea, we're doing all this monitoring on tribal land. But if the salmon were to actually make it up to these creeks, where are they coming from? What do they have to endure in order to make it all the way here? Which led us to kind of expand our program and look further downstream and expand our monitoring, our water quality monitoring. So we have a better idea of the watershed as a whole and what the salmon, what conditions the salmon have to go through in order to make it up to the tribe's land. Next slide. So we were able to collaborate with the Mendocino County Resource Conservation District, MCRCD for short, in order to do some water quality monitoring on Outlet Creek in what's known as the mitigation lands, which is where Caltrans put in the bypass on the north side of Willits. And what we found there is that there are places in Outlet Creek where at a certain time of year, the driest time of year, it dries up completely. And this area was once a wetland. It's called Little Lake Valley because there was a lake named Little Lake that was drained. There was a natural granite ledge that held the lake in, and it was dynamited to drain the lake and to make it more accessible for cattle grazing. So what was once this rich tule wetland area, really moist area with lots of habitat for juvenile salmon, is now this one little track that's Outlet Creek. This part of Outlet Creek is actually, there's berms on either side, keeping it in this track. And we all know that creeks and rivers like to meander, they like to move, but this part is like very purposely being kept in this like straight shot, get the water out of there, drain it so that we can graze cattle kind of a mentality. But recently there's more efforts to restore the wetlands in the area. Caltrans and the MCRCD are working on some of those mitigation projects. But yeah, we have concerns about this because some of these pools, like cold water pools in Outlet Creek, would have been areas where juvenile salmon could wait out the summer and grow and get ready for their trek to the ocean. But if it's drying up entirely, that's just not possible. Next slide. So in August, we were able to join the MCRCD in saving some fish. So this pool, it's dry on the far side and it's dry on this side. It's an isolated pool of water. And the pool itself was basically about to dry up entirely. So we came out, MCRCD folks, Joe Scriven had put in a permit to do this work a year previously. And so we were able to come out for an afternoon and basically pull the net across and then scoop out any fish looking for juvenile salmon and steelhead, any fish that we could kind of save before this little pool dried up entirely. We did not find any juvenile salmon. We did find this one amazing steelhead that was about a 3-year-old steelhead. So we were able to save it and then bring it further downstream to where the creek was still flowing and release it down there. Next slide. So in expanding our monitoring sites, we're now going as far as the confluence of the Eel River and Outlet Creek. So that's Outlet Creek coming in under that old railroad bridge. And then this is the Eel River coming under this other highway bridge that's Coppola Road flowing this way. So we are monitoring the Eel River before Outlet Creek joins it and then after Outlet Creek joins it, just to see, get a better idea of this area where any salmon that are coming up towards Willits, up towards tribal lands, will have to make that turn right there and go up Outlet Creek. So we're just, exploring this area, monitoring it, observing it over the different seasons of the year to see what's happening. But we're also thinking it's really great to have this data on this part of the Eel River, knowing that the dams are coming down and the dams are upstream up here. So we kind of have a beforehand measurement. So as the dams come down, we'll be able to notice any changes that are happening to the water quality. Next slide. We've also gone to visit all the way to the Eel River estuary. Again, just thinking about the path that the salmon have to travel. Hundreds and hundreds of miles, over 100 miles, nearly 200 miles they have to travel to get to us, which it's one of the longest salmon runs there is, especially in California. And so we're just interested in knowing more about that. And so we took this trip during the Salmon Restoration Conference and got a tour of salmon habitat restoration they're doing right in the estuary. And it's pretty inspiring, creating a lot more salmon habitat there. And so that's really good to know about. Next slide. All right, so when we're out doing our water quality monitoring, we are looking at certain thresholds. If, one of these parameters is below a certain amount or above a certain amount, that is a cause for alarm, because these thresholds are set at rates that are, the ideal conditions for salmonids to live are like right in the middle, right in that sweet spot. So anything below or above is kind of a red flag. The next slide. And we've only been doing these new sites off of tribal land since this March. So hasn't been too long, and we are still reviewing a lot of the data. We haven't done a full analysis. That's our next task when we submit our yearly review of water quality. So we're definitely in the middle of doing analysis, but here are some preliminary results. So the blue dots are within that sweet spot range. That's good salmon habitat. And then anything that's a red droplet is somewhere where there has been an exceedance sometime within the monitoring period between March and now. So you can see at some places there's issues with temperature, and some places there's issues with dissolved oxygen. What's interesting is these spots all in a row there. Those are the spots on Outlet Creek right there. They seem to have good temperature, so that means it might be good habitat for juvenile salmon, the spots that don't dry up. But then we're seeing that there's actually is not good dissolved oxygen. So although that they're cold enough, they don't have enough oxygen for the fish. Next slide. So then we have turbidity and conductivity. Conductivity is basically the saltiness of the water, but not just like sea salt. It's also all different kinds of salts, such as even ones that might be in fertilizer residue and things like that. And I also just wanted to mention that there is a TMDL for this part of the eel watershed for temperature and sediment, and turbidity is a measure of how much sediment is in the water. So that's something we're keeping in mind when we're doing this water quality monitoring. So it looks like the turbidity is not too bad on Outlet Creek, but then that spot on the Eel River right there, there was an exceedance in turbidity. Which I'm thinking was probably in the late spring, because I remember seeing the water looking like really brown at that point in time. And then conductivity seems to be good, except for this spot right here, where Outlet Creek turns and goes from following along the 101 to following along Covelo Road. Next slide. So just in conclusion, Sherwood Valley is an Eel River tribe. And a lot of people, you know, kind of forget Outlet Creek is part of the Eel River. So just wanted to, you know, remind everyone that the tribe is here, the tribe has been here, and relies on Eel River resources for tradition, food, medicine, baskets, and connection to nature. Moving forwards, we're looking forward to collaborating with different environmental organizations, with tribes, different agencies on doing restoration work. We're looking at the tribal beneficial uses and trying to establish those on some of the important waterways, and also actually physically getting out there and doing habitat restoration and working to restore things for the salmon. Yeah, I guess that's about it. Next slide just has our contact info if you want to get a hold of us. And then we also have these brochures that just talk more about our program. I'm going to pass them around. If you don't want one, that's fine. Just keep it passing them. But if you want one, go ahead and take one. Yeah, thanks so much for this opportunity to share this information.
Thank you, Anna. And thank you to Nicole and Mike and Luis and Stony, all for your presentations. We've got a little time if folks have any questions for any of the presenters or any observations and comments you wanted to share. Any questions? Let's go to Vivian.
I don't have a question. I just want to thank all of you because your presentations were all very educational and helpful and give a lot of perspective on different parts of the river and how important they are to tribal groups. Thank you very much.
I'm Kathy Monroe with the RCD. Yeah, I agree. They were good presentations. And I'm glad to see that the Sherwood tribe is working with the RCD. And the mitigation, I hope that can be expanded. But then I also, no one mentioned the lamprey. Well, actually someone did mention lamprey at some point. Are they are they showing up very much? I'm really concerned about the lamprey because I know it was a very important food source.
I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I can tell you that last year at Cape Horn Dam, there's a lamprey passage system with a video weir. And last year was one of the highest returns on record. I want to say it was somewhere in the range of 8,000 lamprey. They typically get a few hundred. And so it's lamprey don't home to their natal streams. So it's a little hard to know why they show up. They're a bit of a mystery in the ocean. But interestingly, we have been hearing from other watersheds across the state, high lamprey returns as well. So last year, for whatever reason, was a good lamprey year.
Yeah, and I understand they've figured out how to help them with passage too by using tubes instead of the ladders.
And Dave, I don't know if you have any Russian lamprey stories to tell, but
Other questions? I'm going to ask you to wait till public comment. That's okay.
I'm Tyrone, Ukiah Tribe of Indians, Sergeant Arms. I just want to thank Nicole for putting that presentation together, highlighting the legalities of living with the tribes in the area. And I just wanted to point out and keep everybody in mind who lives in the Ukiah Valley and maybe visualize how many tribes are along these rivers and along the Ukiah Valley, and take into account the legalities that it is when you guys are want to interact or have plans and projects, or alter watersheds, and just take that in account and remember who and where we are in this this relationship of the environment that we're trying to do. We're trying to steward. We're trying to bring these things back and bring our sustainable agriculture, our sustainable foods back into the valley, so they're accessible for our tribes, and we could once again get in contact with our cultural practices, our cultural heritage, and just be back in contact with ourselves. Thank you, Nicole.
Vivian, did you have another? Okay. Jim, were there any hands on up? Okay. All right. With that, I'm going to suggest we turn it to you, Charlie.
Me again. So we were asked to present a bit on the ongoing efforts on the Eel River towards restoration. And so I think Nicole, Luis, Mike, Anna, and Vivian after me will sort of speak to the why. I'm going to speak more to the how in terms of fisheries recovery on the eel. You can go to the first slide. And I'll just add too, these are only some of the efforts being undertaken on the eel. Cal Trout is just one fisheries restoration organization. There's tribes, a number of other NGOs, governmental organizations, all working to recover fish. And so, yeah, Cal Trout has done a number of convenings, which I'll talk about briefly, to try to bring everyone together to really try to work together in this great big watershed to recover salmon and steelhead. So a bit of context, just kind of an overview of what historic runs are thought to be in the Eel River. The eel is thought to be one of the most productive salmon and steelhead rivers in the state, perhaps only third behind the Klamath and the huge Sacramento San Joaquin system. And so Cal Trout commissioned a report back in 2010 to try to help get at those historic numbers, what we're actually here historically. And in good years, the report found that close to 1 million fish from all the species combined. And in less favorable years, more of an average year, probably, somewhere around half of that. So hugely productive watershed, and frankly, a ton of fish. And those numbers have declined pretty precipitously over the last several decades. These estimates from the 1960s are from CDFW. And now the numbers we have, this is more of a whole watershed view, so not just Cape Horn Dam numbers. But we're fortunate to have some sonar a number of sonar operations in the Eel that have helped us get these sort of more contemporary estimates. And so this is sort of a, me just averaging the last several years we've had, but, somewhere in the neighborhood of 8,000 Chinook salmon specifically that we're seeing on the sonar. So pretty significant drop from historic populations. Next slide. And, everyone's heard it before. It's really death by 1,000 cuts. It's not just dams that are causing problems for salmon and steelhead. It really is a watershed wide alteration. We've fundamentally changed how these landscapes work. And here are just a number of factors in the Eel River. Next slide. But I do think, we at CalTrout certainly feel like there's a lot of opportunities for recovery in the Eel River. We think it's a watershed where we really can have hope. And a ton of efforts have been undertaken, especially in the last 20 years to try to recover these fish. So there's barriers being removed all over the watershed. This is a project we just completed last year on Cedar Creek, which is a really important cold water tributary to the South Fork Eel near Leggett. This is an old hatchery dam that our North Coast shop removed. Modern fisheries management is much more cautious with how we're managing populations. Many of you know commercial salmon season was closed this year. There's a lot more to do on distributed water extraction across the watershed. And again, efforts on a number of different fronts. Luis talked a little bit about the pike minnow efforts. CalTrout's making a big effort on the South Fork using an experimental weir, as well as a lot of monitoring associated with it to try to better understand how non-native pike minnow in the Eel River are using the watershed. We're finding that they're migrating, and essentially looking for places in their life history that we can exploit to help reduce those population numbers. Again, because they're pretty voracious predators and certainly prey on salmonids. So, when we have more time, I'd love to share more about the pike minnow eradication efforts taking place in the South Fork. And we're doing that with a number of partners, I should add, including the Ukiah tribe. Next slide. And so why is dam removal a recovery priority? Well, it's a number of things, but in short, it's getting fish back into habitat that they can't get into. And in places like Cedar Creek and in the headwaters, we know those habitats are important for a number of different reasons. The quote here on the lower right is from the Fitzgerald et al. Paper, which is a group of NOAA scientists that really tried to quantify the value of the habitats above Scott Dam for salmonids. But really, I think the easiest point to make is that those cool water tributary headwater habitats are really disproportionately important for salmonids, just in this part of California that we live. Next slide. And so for, as I mentioned, others have kind of spoke to the why. When we start thinking about the how, for a group like ours, we really are focused on recovering salmonids. So how do we do that, right? We have limited time and resources. So we have to be really cost and time effective with the work that we're doing. And we have to use the best available science to really understand, where we can make a difference. And unfortunately now that difference needs to be made in the short term to really stem these population declines and get us back on a growth trajectory. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about two big efforts that CalTrout's undertaken in the last several years. One of which is the Eel River Forum. So we started the Eel River Forum in 2012, and really the goal was just to convene people in the Eel River that are focused on watershed recovery. The Eel River is a big watershed. It's pretty rural. And it doesn't really have like a core agency or water district or any sort of a group that was bringing everyone together, just to hear like what everyone else is doing in the watershed. And it included folks from the Russian River watershed as well. The outcome of the Eel River Forum, in addition just to getting to know everyone and sharing information and talking, was the Eel River Recovery Action Plan, which came out in 2016, and it listed 72 actions, that would help benefit the health of the Eel River. Those actions weren't necessarily specific restoration actions, like go put more wood in the stream here, but it was really a broad swath of policy and restoration that would, hopefully move the needle on salmonid recovery. Next slide. And so since then, a number of those actions, I was just looking through the 72 on the list and saying, what have we done? Have been done. There's been a ton of habitat restoration projects, mainly based on the state and federal recovery plans, because that's what's fundable. But also some additional studies, additional monitoring, like the sonar I mentioned, pike minnow suppression work. And really all of these things have cascaded to, what's next for the Eel River Forum. And again, it was originally intended, Eel River Forum, that recovery plan was originally intended just to be like a 5-year plan. So we've accomplished some of that, but we've also seen the need to come up with a more detailed sort of action list to help promote salmonid recovery. Next slide. And so we've taken the Eel River Forum and that convening, that bringing together of people, and launched this new Eel River Restoration and Conservation Program. And so funding for this program actually came from the two basin partnership efforts to take over the license for the Potter Valley project. And this was sort of the Eel River, a portion of the Eel River recovery component of that, which is a basin-wide restoration plan for the Eel River, really looking at, from ridges to the estuary, headwaters to sea, what can we do to really get this watershed on a better trajectory? And this vision statement came out of the Eel River Forum participants and other participants in the recovery plan, or the recovery restoration program, I should say. This is sort of our guiding language. Next slide. So what is the plan and program? It's really, meant to be comprehensive for the watershed. And so it brings together a lot of different information that will eventually be prioritized, and then ideally acted upon. So it's really that framework to prioritize watershed needs. And of course, one of those watershed needs is a monitoring framework. So we have that feedback loop. Next slide. And so the program is the overarching thing. It's all four of these pillars here. And really what we're focused on now is the plan. It's this initial step, which is developing the program goals, selecting the focal species, developing sort of our spatial analysis, getting into the actions. And, we have a steering committee, we have a technical advisory committee that's all helping us, and a great team of consultants, I should add, that's helping us really do this planning piece. And so everything really comes out of this plan, right? We have to start at a very high level to set those goals, focal species, and then work on sort of the life cycle models and data gaps that we need to fill. I'm going to spare you guys from too much of the technical stuff. Next slide. And again, this is what we're focused on in the short term. And so that, if those four pillars are our key focus now and in the next year or two is really going to be on this phase one, which again will lead into this prioritization process of what are the key actions we need to take to recover the Eel River. Next slide. And so what makes this program different than traditional restoration? And I would argue that traditional restoration tends to be pretty species specific focused. We have a focal species. We know coho need wood in stream, pool depth of this, this depth, water temperature of this, but that doesn't actually speak to the function of the ecosystem, right? It doesn't talk about the web of interactions that actually allow those species to thrive. And so that's what we're trying to do here. And by integrating those needs of multiple species at multiple spatial scales at different stages in their life, right? For salmonids, they're migratory species, so they're moving all over the watershed. Our our hope is that these actions, by spreading that out, will give us a better outcome, right? Because we're not just focusing on a juvenile life history, right? And then they get eaten by a pike minnow as they swim downstream or die in the estuary because, you know, the estuary is disconnected. And so by breaking it down into this broader look, our hope is then that those specific actions that come from it will be multi-benefit, right? So each action should have a outcome that will be more beneficial to more than just one species. The other piece I'll add here is that climate resilience work is tied into this. You know, again, we're doing a ridges to sea approach. And so we're not just talking about in-stream riparian restoration necessarily. We're also talking about getting fire back on the landscape and potential acquisitions, you know, under the governor's 30 by 30 policy. So broader restoration actions than you might traditionally see, you know, in a fish restoration plan. Next slide. And so we were asked to keep this brief. You know, we've got a ton of information on the program and plan. And so I mostly want to provide these resources and just also add the Eel River Forum is open to everyone. So the Eel River Forum's emails there. We have, I'm not sure how frequently the meetings are right now, at least quarterly. Everyone's welcome to join. There's a ton of information from past meetings and slide presentations there. So this will obviously be up on the Russian River Water Forum website. And if anyone's interested in, you know, learning more about the Eel River Recovery Program, please either reach out to me or, you know, hop on the website.
Great. Thank you, Charlie. We've got a little bit of time for questions. See you, Bree.
I really enjoyed that presentation. My question is, you're talking about the basin-wide restoration plan. Do you have funding for that? And if so, how did you obtain it and from where?
Yeah, so the plan, that first pillar is funded right now, and it's CDFW funding that we applied for with the support of the Two Basin Solution Partnership. But the other three pillars are yet to be funded. But, you know, I would say work is starting on that now, but really we need that first pillar to be, you know, relatively complete before we start going after the other funding.
Mike Shaver, Powder Valley Tribe. Thank you, Charlie, for the presentation. Yeah, you mentioned that the forum's open to everyone, and Powder Valley probably reaching out to join. Are you working currently with any tribes in the planning process? I thought Cado had mentioned they were working with some people up there.
Yeah, and you know, my day job is not running Eel River Forum, so yeah, I know some folks from Laytonville have been there. Certainly, Round Valley has been a part of that, and I believe other tribes as well. We ought, of course. So yeah, any tribe's welcome to join, and we would certainly welcome you guys being a part of that.
Because as I showed in my presentation, we have US EPA funding for water monitoring. Tribes do have available many federal funding sources through the Clean Water Act, 319, or BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs, fisheries programs. But yes, some partnerships with tribes may help with the implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I sort of alluded to it earlier, right? There's so much work to be done that one group can't possibly do it all. And so, you know, I think one of the biggest values that we found in the Eel River Forum is just that, right? Like learning what everyone else is doing and figuring out how to integrate all that work to get better recovery outcomes. Yeah.
Thanks, Charlie, for that overview. Caltrell has been a great leader in the Eel River, putting together these Eel River watershed forums. There have been 100 people at them usually, agency folks, Calvary Conservation Corps, watershed stewards, students from the university, restoration workers from NGOs. And it's really a great place to learn what each other's doing. As you said, it shows the level of community involvement that people in our area are willing to put in to try to get these fish back and the health of the river for all the users. Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, a shout out to our North Coast team. I mean, like I said, I am not in charge of the Eel River Forum. It's really Darren and his shop out of Humboldt that have done the lion's share of this work.
Nicole Whipple, Save California Salmon. I would just like to thank Charlie for all of his hard work and dedication to, working on our Eel River, and share that, as in my internship, I was introduced to the Eel River Water Forum, and I do encourage our tribes to be involved because I was welcomed with great big open arms. I have met many NGOs, was able to, participate with American Rivers and have work on an op-ed, which, was able to list the Eel River as one of the most endangered rivers, which is very important. We got to do our eco flight with Cal Trout and as well as Friends of the Eel. So I do encourage our tribal people to be involved, because every single time I enter these forums and coalitions, they are asking, they're like, yay, we're so happy to have tribal representation. Can you get us more? So I do encourage you to be involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Good presentation, Charlie. I had a question. You're no doubt aware of the study by Fish and Game, I think, about how many hundreds, or actually about 1,000 miles of spawning streams that are scattered throughout the Eel River that are blocked and partially blocked. That seems to be the best place to start something like this, because it's the low-hanging fruit. Are you using that study to identify places where clearances can be gotten so that the restoration could begin, and some of these spawning streams have been blocked either by culverts in the wrong place or bridges put in, just myriads of ways that the spawning streams have been blocked out?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have dams on the slide, but it's really barriers, like you mentioned. It's arguably culverts are probably blocking more miles of stream in the Eel River, and road building. So yeah, absolutely. That's all taken into consideration. And I would say the good news is with passage barriers for fish is most of those are pretty well cataloged at this point, right? Because it is the low-hanging fruit. Those are opportunities that are sought out pretty frequently. And I think that Cedar Creek project was one of the highest priority barriers in the Eel River, that we were finally able to get out of there.
Thank you.
Hi, I just have a quick observation. I appreciate all the work that's being done in the Eel River watershed and to restore the fisheries. And what I think I would like to see, or I'm hopeful we can put together complementary to that, is the same for the Russian River, as the Russian River fishery is equally impacted and collapsed. And so in my spare time, I'm putting together a blog called Sustainable Mendocino, because I think there is a lack of coordinated networking in certainly the upper Russian River and possibly the lower. So it will be a forum for people to be able to network, and I'm going to start listing out the resources I know of that are ongoing right now, grant opportunities, barriers, challenges, and just trying to get something going similar to what you have, to coordinate a coordinated effort to restore the fisheries, because I think we really need that here as well.
Yeah, I would certainly welcome that. I would say the lower river is better coordinated in some ways, but yeah, I definitely see a need for that. I would agree. So yeah, and we'd welcome being a part of that, and I know other folks would as well.
Vivian, do you have another question? Oh, okay. And then after that, I'd suggest let's get to your presentation.
I saw on the National Marine Fisheries website that the Russian River has been chosen to be a priority for funding for restoration for fisheries from the federal side there. So that should help with all your coordination and our coordination. Thank you.
Okay. Jim, any questions? Okay, so Vivian, let's turn it to you for the final presentation on Eel River, and then we've got a few things we want to cover, including public comment.
could pass these around to look at. First, I was asked to mention a couple of letters that were submitted to FERC by Senator Mike Thompson in response to his questions to CAL FIRE and the U.S. Forest Service about fire control and the use of Lake Pillsbury. And that if anyone would like to see those, that then the facilitators could post them. If you haven't seen them already, they're in the regular filings. I'm sure some of you have seen them. This is my husband, David, at work in his office, catching salmon on the sea. And I'm going to talk to you today about the fishery that we had that we have lost that could be restored. It's said that 80 million in jobs related to the fishing commercial from the Eel River restoration alone could be restored to our coastal communities. And that's not counting the recreational fisheries on the river and the people who come as tourists just to see and enjoy the river and swim in it and boat.
Tell Henry.
Doesn't work? Oh. Here's our boat. The corregidor. My husband has fished salmon and crab for 50 years. And I fished out of Fort Bragg for 20 years, quite some time ago. Even with the fish that remained in the river, we've had thriving fishing communities up till about 30 years ago, when we started being closed down to protect the weakest stocks. Since we have weak stock management in our ocean fishery, because we fish on stocks that are mixed with others, we're prevented by the decline in the fisheries, as in the eel, from catching other fish that are doing even better. Because the fish we caught in the ocean were from the Rogue River and the Umpqua and the Klamath and the eel and the Sacramento River and even Columbia River fish. So as we followed the fish up the coast, there's a nice 300-pound fish load. That was worth about $1,000 at the time, would probably be worth about $3,000 now, bringing fresh local seafood to market. Low carbon footprint, heart healthy. Next slide. There's my husband David with a piggy oinker. That's a nice big fat Chinook salmon. They are fun to catch. Now, this is a hook and line fishery. We land each of these fish by hand, like this. We promote next slide, conservative fisheries management. And that's how fat the fish were down below San Francisco just 3 or 4 years ago. Next slide. Yours truly for the big fat market fish. Go ahead. So we used to follow the fish up the coast. We'd start down by Morro Bay or Monterey and follow the fish up the coast. and the 4th of July was the time to be in Fort Bragg. There'd be several hundred boats in that port. And Fort Bragg fished a lot on Klamath and Eel River fish and would deliver in Eureka, Trinidad, Fort Bragg. Some days the fishing looked like this. Next slide. And some days it was like this. We'd be hanging on. So we'd anchor up at night, or if we were way offshore on the edge of the shelf, we would drift at night and put on lights so as not to get run over by shipping traffic. It was really peaceful anchoring off the coast in the summertime when you can see the traffic driving along the roads and you're surrounded by the water and the birds, and you put your fish away for the night. You're rocking on the anchor. The birds are all around. Some people say we fish so that we can anchor. Some people anchor so they can fish. Next slide. Here's a picture of the Farallon Islands. We fished there, but they're miles off San Francisco. Sometimes you can see them in the distance from the Golden Gate Bridge. Next. And here's what they look like when we're fishing there. So that's a nice day when you could actually anchor out at the islands. Next. Now, fishing was a mom and pop fishery, and people would take their kids along. We'd live on the boat all summer and deliver in places like Half Moon Bay, Oakland, Sausalito, Dago Bay, Fort Bragg, and Eureka, and fish up into Oregon as well. Here's a picture of the canyons off of where we live, off of the Eel River. That's the Eel River Canyon, Mendocino Canyon. These are under the sea places where fish come up to feed. Spanish Canyon, Mendocino, Mattole Canyon, right here between Cape Mendocino and Punta Gorda, the westernmost part of the United States, continental U.S. Spanish Canyon, Delgado Canyon comes right up to the beach, very deep. These are fishy places where we like to go and troll for salmon. And this is right on the triple junction of the Mendocino Fault, the San Andreas Fault, and Juan de Fuca Plate, which is to the north. Next slide. This picture of Noyo River in Fort Bragg in Mendocino County was taken in the 50s. There was a pretty active fleet there at the time. Next slide. And this was in the 80s. And in July, the boats would be tied out so deep you could barely get up the river. Next slide. Look in the other direction or toward the boat basin in Noyo Harbor. Noyo Harbor at the busy time of year. And now it's just like a ghost town. Most of those boats have been crushed. Now, when your season is closed, you lose your equity. You cannot sell your boat or your permit when there's no season, but you still have your fixed costs. Now, how are people supposed to survive from season to season if you don't have, on those years when you don't have an income? And so many people went out of business in the early 90s when I was in Fort Bragg. And many of them went into other ways to make a living, like types of agriculture that they hadn't before. And some of those were had impacts on the well. Go ahead. Here's Eureka Harbor before and after. So we lost our world markets. We lost our infrastructure. We know what it's like to have to make these big adjustments. It's not easy. Go ahead. This is from a little video of the world's largest salmon barbecue in Fort Bragg. Every summer, the fishermen would donate part of their catch, and thousands of people would come and have an outdoor party. At the time, Mike Thompson's our representative over there, and he's talking about how we could no longer use local fish for our fundraising barbecue. We had to use flying fish from Alaska and fly the fish in to raise the money there. And I recommend you go to that little video. It talks about what it was like fishing, the grandfather and the grandson, people I know, and how the business has changed. So this was in 2008. I'd get fish from Alaska. Go ahead. Now we'll talk about sport fishing on the river, another big source of revenue that is no longer happening right now. Here's a nice steelhead that a client of our friend caught. Now, a catch and release fish, next slide, at that time would bring a lot of money to the community, even caught and released. That would be the equivalent of, for a released fish, $700 of income into the community. You've got hotels, restaurants, breakfast, gear, and a fishing guide, which is no longer happening on the Eel River. We have here one of our longtime ecological practitioners who helped a lot of us do restoration work in the river. Mr. Bell is in the room today with us. And here he's got a nice little Chinook from the river. And here is his wife, Lil, with about a 50-pounder caught in the Eel River. I think it took several hours to bring that fish ashore. Go ahead. That's a big fat steelhead in the Eel River. Go ahead. And a Chinook. Someone you happen to know? Go ahead. People love to come here and fish. It's a world-class fishery. There's a nice one turning to spawning colors. Go ahead. Oh man, he's not even holding that out at distance. These fish are fun to catch and release. So go ahead. A big Chinook and a nice steely there. That's Tom Westlow, one of our longtime active fishermen. And go ahead. This, I wanted to talk more about conservative fisheries management, which is we promoted barbless hooks. So we could turn the hook up and release fish. They have to be at least bigger than this before we could keep them. If they're only this big, we turn the hook up and let them go till next year. We promoted limited entry, so a limited number of fishing permits, and also taxed ourselves for a salmon stamp for restoration. Here's a anchorage off Buck Creek below Punta Gorda after a nice day of fishing. Go ahead. And a rainbow over Woodley Island Marina in Eureka Harbor. So these fish can rebound. They just need to have cold water at the right time of year and connectivity. And we have a movement of people in Northern California and Southern Oregon who want to have salmon fisheries for their offspring in the future, and healthy rivers, which the fish are a sign of. So in order to fish, we need to have a harvestable surplus beyond what's needed for delisting the fish, which is a viable self-sustaining population. And that's the direction that we're heading. We're down to like less than 2% of historic populations in the eel, and we're really looking to get more of those fish back by every avenue that we can. Any questions? You can see that fishing was a lot of fun, and it was a cultural way of a community, and that we brought a lot of income into the area. We had gear stores, haul outs, retail markets, and that's all gone right now, but we hope to get it back someday. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. Okay. Any questions? Jim, is there one online?
Greg Young online.
Greg, do you have a question?
Yes, Vivian, this seems to be a big unknown, so maybe you know something about it. Can you comment on the impact of fishing in international waters, which is unregulated, at least by us, on our populations here in California?
Yes, I can. 1978, the Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Management Act put in a 200-mile limit exclusive economic zone off of the U.S. West Coast that kept foreign ships from coming up our coast, which we would see Russian ships and other ships coming up our coast right before the salmon season in the early 70s. And those were kept out. And except for some joint ventures for a little while, we've had no foreign ships catching our salmon. They tend to stay on the coastal shelf where all the feed is, and they migrate up and down the coast. Does that help?
Do you think it's not significant what's going on out there and beyond that limit? Do we have evidence of that?
What is the evidence of that? Well, the Coast Guard patrols, and so does the National Marine Fisheries Service and all the survey boats.
But
you have shipping.
Right, but not outside the 200-mile limit. Is there any international reporting of take out there and what species and things?
They tend to fish on the highly migratory species like the tuna in the high seas. The salmon don't tend to go out to the high seas too much, as far as we can tell.
Okay.
Mike, final question.
Mike Shaver with Potter Valley Tribe. Vivian, the tribes worked with the Marine Protection Act folks as part of our Fort Bragg property. We work with them on education. And as part of the Marine Protection Act, they have certain preserves. If my understanding, the idea for those marine preserves is those act like seed banks and help feed and help restore the ecosystem along the whole marine shoreline. Maybe it might be more beneficial to some of your more surf fish, rock fish. But do you see any benefits from the Marine Protection Act with the salmon stocks, or is there any potential for coordinating with that effort for marine preserves?
I don't see how the marine preserves help salmon much, because the salmon migrate right through them, and they're designed to reduce impacts on fish that stay in one place. Now, even the lingcod migrate up the coast and spawn, and then they come into the shallows. So we kind of had those marine protected areas shoved down our throats. They're very difficult to fish around because there's so many of them and with different designations. And you're working on this platform on a giant moving river. Besides the up and down, you have the current and the wind, and you have to use your satellite locator to make sure you stay out of these areas. You're subject to being fined up to 5 years later if you slow down in one of those areas. What if you have some engine trouble and you happen to be in one of them? You can't have your gear out. You can get in big trouble. $8,000 a day fines and things like that. A lot of local areas were closed that sport fishermen from far away, say in Bodega Bay, the entire reef out in front, those folks have to go 10 miles now to get in their little boats to catch some fish. And they were out of the area. They didn't really have input on where those areas were to be located. Now,
Vivian, I'm gonna move us on. Thank you.
you can ask me more later. I'll give you an earful.
Okay. I'm just mindful of the time, and thank you again, Vivian. We've got 20 minutes left. By show of hands, I do want to make sure we have time for public comment. Who of the folks in the room are interested? I have one comment card from Craig Bell. Are there other folks? So there's one other, two. Okay, so a couple people. And then Jim, how many people online, if any?
We have one online, and then I have Nancy Todd card here also. Who's in the room.
Okay, great. We should have time. So Pam, I'm going to turn it over to you just to give an update on next steps to the water forum. I think Pam can just stay at your seat. Yeah.
Thanks, Ben. So I'm providing this update on behalf of Grant Davis, who's not here. So David is his alternate, but I'm going to relay this message from him. So the water forum, I think hopefully everybody who's here has been involved since the beginning. And as everybody knows, we've made some pretty nice progress bringing all parties together on both sides of both basins, river basins, as well as issues that people aren't necessarily on the same side on. We're hoping that this has been helpful for people to help understand what everybody is working on. I think the last 3 meetings have been a good example of, some good information shared from the Russian watershed, from the Eel watershed, and also from the Lake County folks at the last meeting. But at this point, we feel like we don't feel like we have an issue with funding. So I just want to make that clear. We have identified some common ground here, and I think that that's really good. We've also, I think, accomplished a lot. Those interviews that Kearns and West did back at the very beginning, a year ago now, with regards to this forum, were super helpful. I think it helped to form this group the way it ended up being formed. This planning group specifically has met 5 times, starting earlier this year. And as I said, I think that the information that has been shared has been super helpful. And I think there's been some really good discussions that have occurred, and good relationships that perhaps have been developed as a result of the forum. So, but as I mentioned, we are struggling with funding. So the first part of the forum was funded using Department of Water Resources grant funding matched by Sonoma Water. And then the second portion of the second phase, I'll say, of this is really been funded by Sonoma Water as well as our water contractors. And we did apply for a Department of Water Resources grant, which we were not able to obtain. And so that has put us in a position where we no longer can continue to fund this. And we are expecting to have the meeting today. We're hoping to have one more meeting in the March-April timeframe, about the time that there's expected to be a selection of the project to move forward for the new Eel Russian facility. If folks want to continue this process, if they want to step up and, contribute some money, or whatever the case may be, that might be an opportunity, but our contract with Kearns and West will run out in the first half, at least, of 2024. So we really do appreciate everybody's time and efforts here. We certainly have learned a lot. I hope you all have learned a lot. And one other thing I'll just mention is that although we do expect to run out of funding in the early part of next year, that one option might also be to change the format of this meeting so it's completely virtual, which is much less expensive. And we may be able to get another meeting scheduled in the June timeframe, which is about the time that PG&E's next draft document will be coming out. But that has to be decided. So I just wanted to share that. We do have a steering committee. I think that'll, consider that. So, so we'll see how that goes. But I just wanted to share that with the group on behalf of Grant. So happy to answer any questions that I can.
All right. Thank you, Pam. Any questions?
Pam, I had a quick question about the funding issues and how that's kind of playing out. I know we have many working groups associated with this, and all of them make a very important contribution, in my opinion. But I'm wondering if the number of those kind of subgroups is impacting, how we can stretch that funding. And the reason I ask is because, as you pointed out, I do think it's relatively important to just at least stay assembled through that draft from PG&E.
So the working groups, the only working group that has really been meeting is the water rights. And I'm not going to get the proper terminology for the working group. That's what I call it. And that group has not been meeting recently. So there really hasn't been a lot of funding that has ended up going towards all those working groups. It just is the way it is. We were, working hard, but we're trying to keep up with a process that we're not really keeping up with. So so those working groups actually we don't intend for them to meet from this point on. I should have mentioned that also. I apologize, I didn't. So what we see is a meeting of this group, the planning group, in the March-April timeframe. Fingers crossed, maybe we can do a June meeting, but that's it as far as activity goes.
And then are you able to share with some of those at this meeting who have fundraising experience what the costs look like? I just worry that without getting this set of people together, that we're missing capturing opinions and perspectives, especially as we move into kind of more of like a FERC style settlement process.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm just not as familiar.
No, I meant
I'm just not as familiar with this.
Even if you circulated that in April, I think it would be helpful.
Okay.
Not trying to put you on the spot, like as a forward request.
No problem.
Thank you for your work you've been doing on this. I wondered if you're going to be maintaining the website when the funding goes down and for how long. And also, we got an email saying that the water rights materials that have been developed will not be shared. But I was wondering if they can be shared within the group because I haven't received any of the working documents from there.
So I'm going to let Ben talk to this perhaps because I'm not as familiar with it. But my understanding is that there's not necessarily agreement on the information that was shared as part of that water rights group. There's some folks in the group don't feel like the information is accurate. And so there's concern about releasing information that might not be accurate. And we don't want the forum to be releasing information that's not accurate. So, so at this point, as far as I know, and Ben can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that that information will not be released. It was draft, and it will stay that way and not be released as a forum work product.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Sorry, it was Jim that worked on that, pointing at Ben.
Many did. Okay, any final questions for Pam? Okay.
I didn't answer the question about the website. So I would expect the website to be up for quite some time. I don't think we intend to take it down. It's a really good source of information. And so I would expect it to be up for quite some time, even after this group maybe doesn't meet anymore. So.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Pam. Got about 10 minutes. We might go a little bit after 1, but I do want to make sure we get all the public comments for those who are interested. So Craig, we'll start with you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Craig Bell, and I'm past president of the statewide Salmonid Restoration Federation. I was chair of the Mendocino County Fish and Game Commission for 15 years. I'm executive director of the Northern California Association of River Guides, and we are formal interveners in the FERC licensing of the Potter Valley Project. And I've also worked for 25 years as a salmon and steelhead fishing guide on the Eel River. I'd really like to say how impressed I am with the tribal watershed literacy. I understand the appreciation and honoring history and bringing emotion, but if you're going to regulatory meetings, bring your data, bring your science. That's how you'll be effective, and you are clearly building a machine and the capacity to do that. So please keep that up. Loss of harvest. I want to talk about loss of harvest. The Eel River, I was also a commercial salmon fisherman, and the Eel River, we lost harvest of coho salmon in 1994. Beginning of 2000, we lost steelhead harvest. Then we lost Chinook harvest. This is a river that was one of the top 3 producers of salmon steelhead in the entire state of California. It now has less than 0 harvest. It has right now on the Eel River, catch and release is not good enough. You are not allowed to fish on the Eel River for the first time in history. Third largest producer of salmon steelhead. You are not allowed to fish. No catch and release. Catch and release is no longer good enough. This river produced an incredible, the South Fork eel, the guides and the sport fishermen brought a large amount of money in tourist revenue. The restaurants were full, the motels were full, the bars were full. Waitresses at the Eel River Cafe in the morning would walk out with $125 cash in their pocket serving breakfast. $125. And a sport caught fish, as Vivian said, was worth over $700 by the time you figure out guide fees, license, tackle bought, staying at motels and restaurants. That is gone. And we did not even receive beads, blankets, or whiskey in return. I'd like to talk about the pike minnow. Back during the earlier FERC relicensing, Larry Week, who then ran the anatomist program for the Department of Fish and Game, he told me that their estimates were that pike minnow eat 30% of all smolts in the entire Eel River system. 30% right off the top, gone to an invasive species. This species, as near as we can tell, came from bait that was brought over to a bait shop on Lake Pillsbury, sold to fishermen. The pike minnow reproduced in that lake, and then in high flows came down into the eel and permanently infected the entire Eel River system. It is probably the worst impact right now with the improvement of logging and the restoration that's going on, taking out barriers, improving roads. The pike minnow, we started catching these fish in the early 90s. We didn't know what they were. We did not know what they were, these suckers with big teeth. So that is an insidious problem, absolutely insidious. The Department of Fish and Game has directed on this, and it is tragic. It is shameful, in my opinion. Our guide association made efforts to fund pike minnow elimination projects, and we could not get a permit from the Department of Fish and Game to use spear guns with experience to kill adult spawner pike minnow. We could not get a permit. I praise Cal Trout's efforts. We began long before you did funding surveys by the Eel River Recovery Project under the direction of biologist Pat Higgins, identifying areas we could have gone in and killed thousands of adult spawning pike minnow. The Department of Fish and Wildlife would not give us permits.
Craig, I'm
Terrible.
gonna
That is
ask
not
you to wrap
leadership.
up, sir. So just to make sure we have time for everyone.
So I would say that, well, the spawning, we have lost 200 miles of spawning habitat above Potter Valley. A lot of the Potter Valley Lake supporters tried to say for many years, I saw letter after letter, only 50 miles, a measly 50 miles. There's 200 miles. There are summer steelhead genetics up there that can be reactivated and put the most endangered run of steelhead back in there to spawn in the shadow of Snow Mountain, in the cold water runoff of Snow Mountain, where those fish can outclimb pike minnow and rear and go to the ocean. So right now I view the Eel River, it's sort of like Rachel Carson's book, The Silent Spring.
Thank you, Craig. I've got a card from Nancy Todd and Holly Smith.
When PG&E bought the Snowy Mountain Light and Power Company's facility, they became part of a 100-year-long process that set the expectations for people who have set up businesses, bought homes, and operated farms all the way down along the Russian watershed. And we are about now going to threaten their ability to continue to do that. And I do think that that puts a financial responsibility on PG&E. They're meeting right next door. We could go tell them, huh? The second thing about it is they're giving up a source of energy that is absolutely clean. And we need to worry about the whole environment, or else we're going the way of the salmon. And it doesn't seem right to be considering giving carbon tax to guys while we're letting people get rid of facilities that produce power with no negative consequences other than the cost of maintaining it. Making power is going to become that expensive that it'll be worth operating the project as time goes on. So, you know, I came here this morning thinking, how come there's no data about the specifics of the seismic power of Scott Dam? And Craig explained it to me this morning that you're not allowed to talk about how a dam could be weak and therefore brought down by a terrorist. So my thought is, let's just strengthen it and put in a fish ladder that lets the guys get around it. You know, the fish get around it. Some of you may know my old friend, Barbara Hopper. She may have been your teacher, your principal. Certainly she was our friend in Potter Valley for a very long time. And she tells me the Cal Trout gave this wonderful presentation in which they talked about figures of counts of salmon going back to the 60s. Now, Barbara will tell you that she and her husband, David, used to go up to the eel, and in the 60s, you could reach down and with one hand pick up a salmon by the tail, and you didn't even need a fishing rod. So to say that Scott Dam, which had by then been in place for 40 years or more, is responsible for the decline of the salmon and the eel seems a little fallacious. It might have more to do with the pike minnow, the logging, and the over fertilizing of marijuana crops along the Eel. So my solution is keep Scott Dam and make it stronger.
Okay, thank you. Okay, John.
Hi, I'm John Laboito. I'm a mostly retired farmer in Lake County now, but previously many years in Humboldt County. And I just have two questions. The first is, I'm wondering, is there anyone here who is representing Humboldt County?
Yeah, Hank Seaman from Humboldt County is online.
Online?
Yes.
All right, thank you. The second question that I have is that so the JPA is going to interface with PG&E and simultaneously develop a plan and probably construct a modified diversion facility. So who decides, approves or disapproves what has to be a greatly changed diversion schedule?
Okay. Any other comments in the room? All right. Do we have anyone online, Jim?
Yeah, we have two people online. First is Holly Smith. Holly, please go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, my questions may be moot, given what Pam said. It sounds like this forum is not going to continue, at least in its previous, composition or frequency. But I just have concerns, and I would have thought there would have been a working group on this, that what happens if the diversion group, the planning entity, doesn't get the funding that they want for the diversion? What does that mean for water users in the area if the diversion infrastructure does not come about? That's one question. The other is that I don't know if the restoration that Charlie talked about includes, well, I'm just concerned for the Lake Pillsbury community, and that is going to be pretty impacted by the dam removal. And besides the restoration of the river, it seems like the entire area is going to need some environmental restoration so that it all works together to support the river, and that you have something perhaps that isn't as bad as people think about with the lake being gone. But if it's done appropriately, it might be an extremely beautiful and healthy area. But I don't know if the Lake Pillsbury group or Lake County is intersecting with the tribal community, which we heard from today, that have some great ideas around restoration of land and rivers. How is that area going to be addressed? I can't imagine the PG&E is going to leave it in a really, really great state. I don't know, just a concern, just putting it out there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Holly. Next, we have Devin with Mendocino County Farm Bureau.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. Devin Bohr with Mendocino County Farm Bureau. This question, or two-part question, really isn't directed towards a specific presenter. I was hoping maybe there can be some at least discussion, or maybe offline, someone can get back to me. Has there been any recent analysis, I guess, in terms of looking at ultimately what the goals are for restoration numbers of anadromous fish on the Eel River, in terms of, one, comparing to the limited historic data we have, which does include hatchery returns, such as at Van Arsdale, and then two, how is that correlated with some of the oceanic issues, not just sort of the foreign fishery concerns that were mentioned earlier, but other issues that are, do affect the life cycles of these fish outside of the freshwater habitat. So I'd just be interested to see if there's any sort of updated information of how those two sort of questions relate to overall goals for restoration numbers. Thank you.
Thank you, Devin. Anybody else, Jim?
Nobody else.
Okay. Craig, I think you had one final sentence.
I'd like to leave you with this thought. I hope to live long enough to be able to see a young man go down to the Eel River, catch a salmon, take it home, and feed his family.
Thanks, Craig. And thanks everyone for your public comments. We'll make sure those are captured in the summary. Let's just go. We have one more slide and then we'll let you go. And thank you for staying a little bit over time here. I think we're just going to talk about next steps. So just meeting recap. I think we got some really informative presentations and had some good discussion. All these slides are going to be available on the website. So we'll make sure you have access to them along with the summary and the recording. As Pam had mentioned, our intention is to have the next planning group meeting sometime in the spring, so you can get an update on the decommissioning process. So just keep a lookout for when we schedule that. We don't have a time yet. And again, deadlines for submitting comments on PG&E's draft decommissioning plan are due December 22nd, and they have to be submitted directly in writing. Okay. Thanks everyone for today's meeting. Travel home safely.